Eat this dessert food to regenerate your stem cells. Most people hear the word dessert and think of one thing: damage, blood sugar spikes, weight gain, inflammation, the exact opposite of repair. So if I told you there is one dessert food that has actually been studied for its ability to improve vascular repair signaling, support the lining of your blood vessels, and even increase a very specific population of repair-targeted cells in the bloodstream, most people would assume that has to be internet nonsense. I thought the same thing. Because when the phrase regenerate your stem cells gets thrown around online, it usually means one of two things. Either the claim is wildly exaggerated, or the writer is quietly switching from real stem cell biology to vague wellness language and hoping nobody notices. But when I went back through the human research on cocoa flavanols, I found something far more interesting than hype. Not magic, not immortality, something more precise than that. The food is high flavanol dark chocolate, or even more accurately cocoa-rich chocolate products that preserve meaningful amounts of cocoa flavanols. And before you move past this thinking, I am about to recommend a candy bar. Stay with me. Because what the human data actually suggests is not that chocolate somehow regrows your organs or turns back your biological age overnight. It suggests that flavanol-rich cocoa may improve endothelial function and, in some studies, increase circulating angiogenic cells or endothelial progenitor cells, repair-linked cells involved in maintaining blood vessel health. That is a much narrower claim than regenerate all your stem cells, but it is also a much more credible and much more interesting one. Here is the practical takeaway up front. If you want the effect researchers are actually studying, the target is not dessert in the generic sense. The target is cocoa flavanol exposure. In human trials, that came from flavanol-rich cocoa drinks, or specific dark chocolate interventions, not from ordinary milk chocolate and not from ultra-processed candy. The dose that repeatedly shows up in vascular studies is substantial, and flavanol content varies wildly between products, which is why the label dark chocolate by itself does not guarantee much of anything. I am going to walk you through 4 things. First, what people online mean when they say chocolate helps stem cells, and what the studies actually measured. Second, how cocoa flavanols seem to change the environment inside blood vessels. Third, the specific trials that made this conversation worth having in the first place. And fourth, the mistake that causes most people to buy the wrong product and get none of the benefit. Let's start with the phrase that gets everybody's attention: stem cells. In the strongest human cocoa papers, researchers were not measuring total body stem cell regeneration. They were measuring populations such as circulating angiogenic cells and endothelial progenitor cells, cells linked to vascular repair, re-endothelialization, and maintenance of endothelial integrity. That distinction matters. This is not a claim about rebuilding cartilage, growing new hair follicles, or regenerating every tissue in the body. It is a claim about a specific repair-linked cell system in the vascular compartment. Now, why would cocoa affect those cells at all? Because the endothelium, the thin inner lining of your blood vessels, is not passive tissue. It is metabolically active, constantly sensing stress, blood flow, inflammation, and nitric oxide signaling. Cocoa flavanols have been studied for years because they appear to improve endothelial function, at least in part by supporting nitric oxide availability and reducing the kind of oxidative environment that makes blood vessels less responsive. That is important because once endothelial function improves, the body's repair environment changes with it. And that is exactly where the repair cell story begins. One of the most important human trials here was a randomized, controlled, double-masked crossover study in patients with coronary artery disease. These patients consumed a high flavanol cocoa intervention providing 375 milligrams twice daily for 30 days, compared with a low flavanol control. The result was not subtle. Endothelium-dependent vasomotor function improved by 47% during the high flavanol phase, and the number of CD34+/KDR+ circulating angiogenic cells increased 2.2-fold compared with the low flavanol period. That is the study that changed this conversation from chocolate is comforting to cocoa flavanols may influence vascular repair biology in humans. And then it got even more interesting. In follow-up work from the same research line, investigators looked at endothelial microparticles, basically markers associated with endothelial injury and integrity. After 1 month of the high cocoa flavanol intervention, those injury-associated microparticles decreased, while endothelial function improved. In plain English, the vascular lining looked less beat up, and the repair side of the equation looked stronger. That combination is the real reason cocoa flavanols became one of the most biologically interesting food compounds in vascular nutrition research. Now, if that were the only study, I would still treat it cautiously. But it is not the only signal. A 2019 randomized crossover trial in adults with cardiovascular risk factors found that 4 weeks of 40 grams per day of extra virgin olive oil enriched dark chocolate significantly increased circulating endothelial progenitor cells. Again, that does not prove every dark chocolate bar regenerates stem cells, but it does reinforce the broader idea that certain cocoa-rich interventions can shift repair-linked vascular cell markers in humans. This is where most content creators oversimplify the story. They jump from repair-linked cells increased in a clinical study to eat chocolate and regenerate your stem cells. That is not what the evidence says. The evidence says cocoa flavanols may improve endothelial function and may mobilize or increase specific circulating cells associated with vascular repair. That is already a powerful finding. You do not need to exaggerate it into science fiction to make it worth paying attention to. And the vascular side of the story is not resting on one flashy paper either. A systematic review and meta-analysis of randomized trials found that cocoa flavanols significantly improved flow-mediated dilation, a standard measure of endothelial function. Across 15 clinical trials and 18 intervention arms, the pooled improvement in FMD was 1.17%, with an apparent optimal effect around 710 milligrams total flavanols. The authors also noted significant bias concerns and variability between studies, which is exactly the kind of nuance you should want if you care about the truth more than the headline. But the direction of the data is clear. Cocoa flavanols are not nutritionally inert. So what is the actual mechanism connecting a dessert food to a repair cell signal? Part of it appears to run through nitric oxide. Cocoa flavanols, especially epicatechin-rich fractions, have been linked to better endothelial responsiveness and nitric oxide-related vascular effects. That matters because nitric oxide is one of the core molecules that keeps blood vessels relaxed, functional, and resistant to dysfunction. When that environment improves, the body becomes better positioned to recruit and maintain the very cell populations that help preserve vascular integrity. Not every step in that chain is fully mapped in humans, but the logic is strong and the trial data points in the same direction. Now let me tell you the part almost everyone gets wrong. They hear dark chocolate and assume the front of the package is the intervention. It is not. The intervention is flavanol content, and flavanol content is affected by processing, sourcing, formulation, and fortification. Reviews on dark chocolate note that cocoa contains bioactive compounds like polyphenols and flavonoids, but processing can significantly reduce those compounds. So two products can both say dark chocolate and behave very differently from a biological standpoint. One may still contain useful flavanols. The other may be mostly sugar, fat, branding, and wishful thinking. That is why the real protocol is not eat more dessert. The real protocol is closer to this. Choose cocoa-rich products where the cocoa itself is doing the work. Keep the portion controlled and understand that the literature is strongest for vascular endpoints and repair-linked cell markers, not for sweeping anti-aging claims. The studies were also not using giant cheat day quantities. They were using measured, repeatable interventions over weeks. That difference matters more than people think. There is also an important boundary here that I want to say clearly. We do not have good evidence that dark chocolate regenerates your stem cells in the broad literal sense people imagine from the title. We do have human evidence that flavanol-rich cocoa can improve endothelial function, reduce markers of endothelial injury, and increase certain circulating angiogenic or endothelial progenitor cell populations in specific settings. That is impressive. It is just not the same as claiming a universal stem cell reboot. So if I were to translate the science into one clean sentence, it would be this. This dessert food does not appear to regenerate all your stem cells, but high flavanol cocoa may help create a more repair-friendly vascular environment and may increase specific blood vessel repair cell populations in humans. That is the honest version. And honestly, it is the more useful version too. Because once you understand that, the whole conversation shifts. You stop chasing miracle foods and you start looking for foods that measurably change human biology in one narrow but meaningful direction. Cocoa flavanols do that. They appear to improve the way blood vessels function. They appear to support nitric oxide signaling. And in certain human studies, they appear to mobilize the kind of repair-linked cells that researchers care about when they study vascular aging and endothelial recovery. So here is the summary of what matters most. 1. The best dessert food candidate for this title is not generic dessert. It is high flavanol dark chocolate or cocoa. 2. The strongest human evidence is not for broad stem cell regeneration. It is for circulating angiogenic cells than endothelial progenitor cells and endothelial function. 3. The mechanism appears to involve nitric oxide signaling and vascular repair biology, not magic. 4. The product matters. Processing can strip flavonols, so the word dark on the wrapper is not enough. 5. The research is promising, but it is still specific, limited, and narrower than the title suggests. That is exactly why it is worth taking seriously.